7 genuinely scary true horror stories. Some stories were never meant to be told. Story 1. Someone walked me home and never left. I didn't think anything of it at first. That's probably the worst part. This happened on a weekday. Nothing special about it. Early fall. Still warm enough that the air felt heavy but not hot. The kind of evening where people are out but not really paying attention to each other. I'd stayed later than I meant to. My phone battery was low, and the power had gone out at my place earlier that day, so I'd been killing time around campus until it felt reasonable to head out. By the time I started walking, the sun was already halfway down. I remember checking the time and doing the math in my head. It wasn't far. 15 minutes if I walked fast. Maybe 20 if I didn't. I'd done that walk before. Same streets. Same cracked sidewalks. Same street lights that flickered on one by one like they were deciding whether or not to bother. Nothing about it felt dangerous. I had my bag over one shoulder, earbuds in but no music playing, just a habit, I guess. I liked being able to hear what was going on around me. Cars passed every so often. A couple people on the other side of the street. Normal sounds. Normal night. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Not sudden. Not rushing. Just there. At first, I assumed it was nothing. Someone else walking the same direction. That happens. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Then the footsteps got closer. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. Sound carries weirdly in the evening. Shoes echo. People speed up, slow down. It doesn't mean anything. Hey, a voice said behind me. I stopped walking before I even realized I'd decided to. I turned around and saw him standing a few feet back. Tall. Broad shoulders. Older than me, maybe late 30s or 40s. Nothing about his face stood out. No scars, no strange expression. Just someone who looked solid. Like he took up space without trying. Sorry, he said, holding up his hands a little, like he didn't want to startle me. I didn't mean to scare you. His tone was calm. Friendly, even. I pulled one earbud out and gave that polite half-smile you give strangers. It's okay, I said. He glanced at my bag. Looks heavy, he said. You heading far? I hesitated. Just for a second. I don't know why I answered. I think it was because nothing about him felt aggressive. He wasn't crowding me. He wasn't blocking my path. He stood there like he expected me to say no. Not really, I said. Just a few blocks. He nodded like that confirmed something. Same direction as me, he said. Mind if I walk with you? That was the moment. The one I replay later. Because I could have said no. Nothing stopped me from saying no. But it didn't feel like a big deal. It felt rude to refuse for no reason. And I didn't have a reason, at least not one I could explain out loud. Sure, I said. That's fine. We started walking. At first it was easy. Normal. He asked where I was from. I gave him a vague answer. He told me he'd lived in the area a while. I noticed he walked slightly closer than most people would, but I brushed that off. Sidewalks aren't that wide. He asked what I was studying. I told him. He nodded like he was filing it away. You're smart, he said. I can tell. I laughed a little. That felt nice. I hate admitting that, but it did. A few steps later, he reached out and adjusted the strap of my bag where it was slipping off my shoulder. It was quick. Almost automatic. Like something a friend would do. Careful, he said. Wouldn't want you dropping anything. My stomach tightened just slightly. Thanks, I said anyway. I remember thinking. He's just being nice. Don't make it weird. We kept walking. I didn't notice when he started matching my pace exactly. Or when he stopped asking questions and just started talking. About himself, about people he knew, about places he'd been. I nodded when it felt appropriate. Laughed when he laughed. And every time a small thought surfaced, this feels off, I pushed it back down. Because nothing bad had happened yet. And because, at that point, I still believed that if something were wrong. But no. It didn't happen all at once. That's what scares me now. There wasn't a moment where I thought I was in danger. It was more like realizing the room had gone quiet without remembering the sound disappearing. At some point, I noticed we'd stopped walking side by side. He was slightly ahead of me now. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough that I had to adjust my pace to stay with him. And when I slowed down, he slowed too. I tested it once. Pretended to fix my shoe. Took an extra second tying the lace. He stopped. Didn't turn around. Just waited. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, standing up quickly. "Sorry." He smiled and started walking again like nothing had happened. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was reading into it. But my body didn't buy it. My shoulders felt tight. My hands were cold. I realized I'd stopped listening to what he was saying, only the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement right in front of mine. Too steady. Too close. We passed under a streetlight that buzzed faintly overhead. For a second, I saw our shadows stretch across the sidewalk. Mine looked thin. He swallowed it. "That bag really does look heavy," he said again. Before I could answer, he reached back and took it. One hand, confident like it already belonged to him. "Oh," I started. "It's okay. I've got it." He didn't let go. "Nah," he said. "I don't mind." He adjusted it over his shoulder and kept walking. I froze for half a step before following him. I don't know why I didn't insist. I don't know why I didn't stop. I think part of me didn't want to acknowledge what that meant. A boundary had just been crossed and I'd allowed it. "You don't live far, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Not far." "Good," he said. "I wouldn't want you walking alone this late." That sentence landed wrong. Because I wasn't alone. The street we were on got quieter. Fewer cars. Houses set farther back from the road. Windows dark. Porches empty. I noticed he was choosing the route now. Turning before I could suggest anything. Cutting through streets I didn't usually take. "Is this way faster?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He chuckled. "Trust me," he said. "I know these streets." Something about the way he said "trust me" made my stomach twist. He started telling me about himself. Not surface level stuff. Not small talk. He talked about getting into trouble when he was younger. About how people misunderstood him. About how he'd done time because he trusted the wrong people. I didn't ask questions. I didn't encourage it. He just kept going. "I get a good feeling from you," he said suddenly. "You're different." I didn't respond right away. "You hear that a lot?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not really." He laughed softly. "Yeah," he said. "I didn't think so." We passed another person then. A couple walking toward us, talking quietly to each other. As they approached, I felt my chest loosen just a little. But he moved closer to me. Not touching. Just close enough that I could feel the heat off his arm. He lowered his voice. "Stick with me," he said. "People are weird out here." They passed us without looking twice. And just like that, the street was empty again. He glanced down at me. "You're safe," he said. "I've got you." My heart started beating too fast. I tried to laugh it off. "That's not really necessary," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have to worry," he said. "I wouldn't let anything happen to what's mine." He said it like a fact. Not a joke. Not a compliment. I opened my mouth to say something. Nothing came out. We kept walking. And that's when I realized something else. I didn't know exactly where we were anymore. I finally recognized the street. That small, ordinary sense of relief hit me first. The kind that makes you want to believe everything is about to be okay. "That's me," I said, pointing ahead. "Just up there." He slowed down. Didn't stop. Just slowed enough that I had to match him again. "Which house?" he asked. I hesitated. I don't know why I pointed instead of answering. I think I needed distance between the words and the truth. "That one," I said. "On the corner." He followed my finger with his eyes. Then he smiled. "Good," he said. "You're closer than I thought." He handed me my bag. Our fingers brushed. I flinched. "Thanks," I said quickly. "I really appreciate you walking me." He nodded like he'd expected that. "Anytime," he said. "You shouldn't be out alone at night." I took a step back. Then another. He didn't move. I waited for him to turn around, to walk away, to let the moment end. He didn't. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "You're nervous," he said. "I'm just tired," I replied. He studied my face for a second too long. "Yeah," he said. "That makes sense." I turned toward my building and walked as normally as I could. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I unlocked the door and slipped inside. Only when it closed behind me did I let myself breathe. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voice. No knock. I told myself it was over. That night I triple-checked the locks, closed the curtains, left the lights on. I barely slept. The next morning, everything looked normal. Cars parked where they always were. Neighbors going to work. No sign that anything had been wrong. That's when I noticed the bag. The zipper was open. I knew I'd closed it. Inside, everything was there. My wallet. My keys. But something else had been added. A folded piece of paper. No name. No explanation. Just a single sentence written neatly in pen. "You made it home safe." I stared at it longer than I should have. I tried to think of a reason. A harmless explanation. There wasn't one. I threw the note away. I told myself to forget. For a while I did. Until a week later, when I was leaving my apartment and noticed something carved into the wooden frame of my door. Small. Careful. Almost polite. Corner house. I never told him where I lived. Story 2. The police broke into the wrong apartment. They said there had been a mistake. I woke up that morning thinking it would be just another ordinary day. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels safe but somehow makes you notice every little sound. I had just finished my morning routine when there was a loud banging on the door. I froze. It wasn't the usual delivery or a neighbor. It was heavier, urgent. Before I could even register, the door burst open. A man in a police uniform stepped inside. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask questions. He just pushed past me as if I wasn't even there. I stumbled backward, trying to gather my thoughts, but all I could focus on was the weapon at his side and the cold, unwavering expression on his face. "You're coming with us," he said curtly. That was it. No explanation, no reasoning, no mention of a warrant. I panicked. I asked him to wait, to show me some paperwork, but he waved me off like my words were invisible. Minutes later, as I was being led out into the hallway, I noticed the chaos outside my door. Flashing lights, officers shouting, doors slamming. I couldn't understand it. I live on the second floor. My neighbors are quiet. None of this made sense. Eventually, one of the officers finally said something that made my heart stop. "We have the wrong apartment." There was a pause. I waited for an apology, some acknowledgement of the mistake, something human. But there was nothing. The officer barely looked at me, muttered something about paperwork, and left as abruptly as he had come. I was left standing there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. My door was wide open. My apartment felt violated in a way that wouldn't fade. And the most terrifying part wasn't even the intrusion itself. It was the thought that if this could happen by mistake, what could happen on purpose? I tried to call the police department to make sure someone would check the records, but every time I spoke to a different voice, I was told it was a misunderstanding, that everything was fine. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that uniform, something in that authority wasn't what it seemed. That day, every sound in my apartment, every knock, every passing car felt heavy. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too long. And I realized then that sometimes, the people meant to protect you can become the most terrifying presence in your life. He kept coming back. I thought the nightmare ended that day. The officer left, the chaos subsided, and my apartment finally felt empty again. But the emptiness was deceptive. A few nights later, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps outside my door. Quiet at first, hesitant but deliberate. I held my breath, heart hammering, listening. The sound would stop if I moved, restart if I didn't. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to see through the peephole, but there was nothing. Just the sound, waiting. Then it started happening more often. I would see a shadow flicker past my window. My mailbox would be rifled through. Once, someone had tried the lock on my door. It was slightly loose, like it had been tampered with. Each time I thought it might be a coincidence. Maybe a neighbor? Maybe a prank? But deep down I knew better. The next time I called the police about it, my stomach dropped. The voice on the other end didn't sound surprised or alarmed. They seemed indifferent. But that wasn't the worst part. The officer from the first raid began appearing near my home. At first, just checking the neighborhood, he said. But the way he lingered, the way his eyes seemed to search specifically for me, it was intentional. I started leaving lights on, doors locked, windows closed tight. I avoided being outside alone. But no matter what I did, he seemed to know my routine. I began noticing him in my peripheral vision. A patrol car parked too close, a figure in the parking lot staring at me just a little too long. Every step I took felt watched. Every sound of sirens, every knock, every creak of my apartment floor made my pulse spike. It wasn't just fear of him anymore. It was the realization that the system meant to protect me could fail me, and that failure had teeth. At night, I would lie awake, heart racing, listening for footsteps, listening for any sound that might signal his return. And sometimes, in the silence, I would hear it. A faint whisper of authority reminding me that he had the power and I had nothing. The wrong address, the right fear. It all came to a head a few days later. I had just returned from a class when there was a frantic, violent banging at my door. My chest tightened and I froze. Then I heard it, a woman's voice, crying, begging for help. But when I looked through the peephole, no one was there. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher's words were sharp, direct. Do not open the door. Stay where you are. Do you have a weapon? The pounding stopped, but my fear didn't. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every shadow outside my window felt alive, watching me, waiting. The next morning, the same officer returned. He came with documents he wanted me and my mother to sign, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, a simple mistake. But there was nothing simple about it. My mother refused. She slammed the door in his face. Afterward, we discovered he had gone to the hospital claiming he needed my medical records. He wasn't investigating, he said. He wasn't the officer involved. But the details didn't add up. The name, the badge number, the entire story, everything was inconsistent. As I dug deeper, I found stories, other people he had harmed, other accounts of abuse of power. A high school teacher, neighbors, online forums. Each tale darker than the last. He had a history of violence, intimidation, and escaping accountability. Even after the lawsuit, even after moving and hiding our location, the fear lingered. I learned to distrust the sound of sirens, the sight of a uniform, the knock at the door. 6 years later, I'm still reclaiming my life. The scars are invisible, but they remain. The official report? It listed a completely different address. The officer? He vanished from the department website. And me? I live scattered across towns on paper, wary, vigilant, haunted by the knowledge that authority can fail, and when it does, it can be terrifyingly personal. Story 3, there was knocking on my door at 1:17 a.m. The first knock. It was a little past 1 a.m. when it started. I was curled up on my couch, the apartment quiet except for the soft hum of my ceiling fan and the faint ticking of the wall clock. My cat was curled at my feet, purring lazily, completely unaware that something felt off. I had just finished tidying up after a long day and was about to climb into bed when I heard it, the faintest of knocks. A soft, almost hesitant tap, tap, tap at my apartment door. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor returning late or someone checking the wrong unit. But something about the timing made my stomach tighten. It was late. Too late for anyone to be visiting, especially without calling first. I froze, straining to listen. There it was again. Tap, tap, tap. This time I thought I heard a voice. Soft, muffled, almost pleading. Please, help me. My pulse spiked. My cat hissed and darted under the couch. My first thought was to ignore it. Maybe it was a prank. But the pleading in that voice, it sounded real, scared, desperate. I grabbed my phone and peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Nothing but shadows stretching across the dimly lit corridor. My apartment complex wasn't large, 8 units per building, and the nearest neighbor's door was across the hall. No one else had knocked on any doors. It was just me. Another knock. Louder this time. Tap, 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 urgent. And the voice again. Softer now, almost whispering. Please, help me. My hands were shaking. I wanted to call the police, but my voice caught in my throat. What if it was a joke? What if it was something else? I tiptoed to the door, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to stay back. I pressed my ear to the cold metal and listened. The sound of sobbing was so faint I could barely make it out. But it was there. A terrified, fragile sound coming from someone or something just outside. I backed away, my mind racing. The apartment building had an outside entrance with a keypad, meaning anyone who knocked on my door had to bypass the first security layer. That meant whoever, or whatever, was out there knew exactly where I lived. My pulse raced. The hair on my arms and neck stood on end. Another knock. This one felt deliberate. Close. Almost intimate, like it was testing my fear, gauging my reaction. I peeked through the peephole again. Empty hallway. My breathing became shallow. I could feel eyes on me, though there was no one there. My cat refused to leave the shadows, its low growl vibrating through the floorboards. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. Dialing 911 felt both necessary and absurd. By the time the dispatcher answered, the knocking stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. It pressed against my ears, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced with every possible scenario. What if someone had broken in before I even looked? What if it wasn't a person at all? What if it was something that had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike? The dispatcher's voice was calm, but it did nothing to calm me. They instructed me not to open the door under any circumstances and to stay on the line until the police arrived. I did as I was told, every shadow in the hallway suddenly seeming like a living thing, every creak of the floorboards making me flinch. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I stayed frozen, clutching my phone like a lifeline, listening to every sound. Tup, tup, tup. But it wasn't coming from outside anymore. No. It was in my mind, echoing with every thought. Every what-if spiraled into something worse. I imagined the knocking growing louder, relentless, until it wouldn't be knocking at all, it would be forcing the door open. When the police finally arrived, the hallway was empty. Not a soul in sight. No evidence. Just my apartment door, solid and locked, standing between me and whatever had been out there. But even as they checked the building and assured me everything was fine, I couldn't shake it. That voice. That knocking. The way it had singled me out. And I knew in that moment I wasn't just being paranoid. Someone, or something, had been out there and it had known exactly where I lived. And it wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet that felt too heavy, too loaded, like the world outside had shifted while I slept. The sun was rising, but the shadows in my apartment still seemed darker than usual. I told myself it was just my imagination, that last night's terror was over. But the memory of the knocks, the pleading voice, lingered in the corners of my mind like a stain that wouldn't wash away. I went about my morning making coffee, trying to ignore the sense of being watched. My cat, normally oblivious, hissed at nothing, his fur bristling. I paused, heart thudding, realizing how unnerved even he was. Something wasn't right. It started subtly. Small things, sounds I couldn't immediately place. A soft creak in the hallway like someone walking just outside my door. The faint smell of mud or damp earth lingering near the threshold. My first instinct was to tell myself it was the neighbors or the wind or some random coincidence. But deep down I knew it wasn't. By evening, the unease had grown heavy enough to make my chest ache. I double-checked every lock, every chain, every deadbolt. I moved my furniture against the doors, my paranoia escalating into ritualistic protection. I didn't sleep much, listening to every groan of the building, every shift of air, imagining footsteps in the hall outside my door. And then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. Softer than before, but unmistakable. My blood ran cold. It was the same pattern, deliberate, patient, calculated. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my phone. I pressed my ear to the door. There it was, the faint, sobbing voice. Only this time it was quieter, weaker, as if pleading for something I couldn't give. I called the police again, my voice tight with fear. They came quickly, flashlights slicing through the darkness of the hall. And again nothing. No footprints. No footprints in the carpet. No one. But as they left, one of the officers paused, eyebrows furrowed. "Did you notice anything else?" he asked. I shook my head, though I had noticed everything. The cold dread in the hall, the way shadows seemed to bend toward my door, the sense that someone had been watching me all day. That night, sleep became impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the windows made me jump. I started imagining shapes outside my door, imagining someone standing just out of sight, waiting for the next opportunity. My sanctuary had become a cage. The building I had trusted to be safe felt like a trap. And then I saw them. Small, muddy footprints leading away from my door. Not fresh enough to be traced to a person easily, but distinct enough that I knew it wasn't in my imagination. Someone had been there. Someone had approached my apartment, left their mark, and vanished. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. What would I say? That someone had been crying for help just outside my door in the dead of night, and now they were gone, leaving only footprints and a memory that refused to fade? I started locking myself in my bedroom at night, leaving my cat in the living room, trying to convince myself that the barricades, the chains, the locks could keep whatever it was from coming back. But I knew. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't over. Whoever, or whatever, had been outside my door was still out there, waiting, watching. Patient. Hungry. And I was alone. A week passed. Each night, I slept with one eye open, one ear straining for the slightest sound outside my door. Every creak, every whisper, every distant footstep made me flinch. The apartment felt alive with unseen presence, shadows stretching longer than they should, corners darker than the night outside. Then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I froze instantly. My heart hammered in my chest so violently I thought it might burst. I dared not move, dared not breathe. I didn't even call the police this time. I had learned they couldn't stop it, or perhaps they didn't want to. This time there was no voice, no pleading, no sobbing, just the knocking. Slow, deliberately terrifying. The sound echoed in my skull, pressing against my mind like a weight I couldn't lift. I crept to the peephole, trembling, but there was nothing. No figure. No shadow. Just darkness. And yet I could feel it, the presence, cold and silent, waiting just beyond my door. The kind of waiting that isn't measured in seconds, but in the slow erosion of sanity. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching my cat to my chest, imagining the worst. Who, or what, had been out there? How long had they been watching me? And why? Morning came, but it brought no relief. The knocking was gone, but the unease lingered, clawing at me from every corner of the apartment. I couldn't leave. I couldn't stay. I couldn't tell anyone. And most horrifying of all, I couldn't stop imagining that when the next night came, the knocks would return. Sometimes when I sit in the silence, I swear I hear faint crying. Not from a distance, but right outside my door. I don't check anymore. I don't answer. I just sit, waiting for the next tap, waiting for the silence that screams louder than any voice. And I know it will come. Because some stories weren't meant to end. Story 4, I wasn't lost. Someone wanted me to be. I had been driving for hours, the kind of night where the roads seem endless, and the headlights barely cut through the darkness. My GPS was my only companion. Faithful, familiar, always guiding me home. Or at least that's what I believed. It started subtly. A soft chime, the voice I knew well saying, recalculating route, even though I hadn't missed a turn. I shrugged it off thinking it was a glitch. But then it happened again. Another recalculation, sending me down a narrow street I didn't recognize. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, uncertain shadows. The kind of shadows that seem to twitch when you aren't looking. The silence around me was almost suffocating. No other cars, no distant sounds of civilization. Just the hum of my tires against the asphalt and the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. That's when I noticed the first car. A dark sedan, its headlights just barely catching mine in the mirror. It wasn't close, not yet threatening, but it was there. Every time I glanced back, it seemed to be behind me. Every time I tried to follow a GPS instruction, the road seemed to stretch longer, darker, emptier than it should. My stomach twisted. Something didn't feel right. The GPS recalculated again. Turn right, it said, and I hesitated. The street ahead looked wrong, overgrown, cracked, abandoned. But the voice insisted, calm and even, almost soothing. I obeyed, gripping the wheel tighter, my heart picking up a rhythm that matched the tires' hum against the rough road. The sedan appeared again, this time at the curve ahead. It slowed, as if waiting for me or maybe guiding me. My chest tightened. The familiar comfort of navigation had vanished, replaced by a creeping unease. I was no longer following a map, I was following a trap. And yet, I had no idea who or what was waiting at the end. The further I drove, the more the road seemed to twist and shrink around me. The GPS continued to insist I follow its voice, each recalculation more insistent than the last. The trees grew closer, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like fingers trying to grab me. Shadows pooled in the corners of the windshield, dark and restless, moving with the rhythm of the road. The sedan was still there, always behind me. Sometimes just visible in the rearview mirror, other times disappearing only to reappear around a bend, as if it knew exactly where I would be. I tried to speed up, my hands trembling on the wheel, but the roads felt endless. Every turn seemed to lead deeper into emptiness. I noticed something else. Signs of civilization had vanished. The faint glow of distant streetlights, the occasional distant hum of a house, all gone. It was just me, the trees, and that car. And the GPS, calm and unyielding, guiding me into the unknown. A cold sweat ran down my back when I saw a movement up ahead. Something crouched at the side of the road, too dark to make out clearly. It looked like a person, but it did not move like a person should. My chest tightened, panic gnawing at my ribs. I wanted to turn around, but the GPS simply said, turn left, then recalculating. I followed anyway because the voice was the only thing that seemed to know the way. The sedan slowed again, its headlights illuminating the curve ahead just long enough for me to see another figure. This one stepped into the road, forcing me to brake suddenly. My tires skidded across gravel and my heart leapt into my throat. The GPS told me to turn again, but the path ahead seemed narrower, more treacherous. Somewhere in the darkness, I realized that the GPS was not leading me home. It was leading me somewhere else, somewhere that had been waiting for me all along. The forest closed in on both sides and the night swallowed the road behind me. The fear was no longer just in my mind. It was tangible, pressing against my chest, whispering that I had already gone too far to turn back. The road ended in a clearing I hadn't seen on any map. The GPS spoke again, calm and detached, telling me to stop. I did. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart hammering like a drum in my chest. The sedan had pulled up behind me and now idled silently, its engine almost imperceptible. The headlights illuminated the clearing just enough to reveal a circle of old rotting signs. Faded warnings. Symbols that made no sense but screamed danger. I wanted to reverse, to escape, but my car felt glued to the ground. Every instinct screamed to run, but the forest around me seemed alive, almost suffocating, pressing in on the edges of the clearing. The GPS recalculated again, then said in its unnerving monotone, "You are here." I looked down at the screen. There were no reroutes. Not a single turn. Every path I thought I had followed had been mine alone. The GPS had done nothing but guide me willingly into this trap. I glanced at the sedan. The driver's face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel the gaze boring into me, patient, deliberate, like they had been waiting for this exact moment. Panic clawed at me, but I forced the engine forward, praying to escape. The clearing stretched impossibly far, and the car behind matched my every movement. It was no longer just a vehicle following me. It was a predator and I was prey. I finally broke free of the tree line, bursting onto a road I recognized. My pulse was jagged, my breath shallow. I stopped the car and looked back, but the sedan was gone. The GPS returned to its normal function, plotting a route home as if nothing had happened. Later I checked the history. There were no reroutes. The GPS showed a straight path the entire time. Every dark road, every twisting turn, every moment of being watched, it had never been recorded. The device that had seemed to guide me had only made it possible for someone, or something, to decide exactly where I would go. I never used that GPS again. Every time I see a navigation voice in another car, I shiver, wondering if someone, somewhere, is waiting for me to follow its instructions again. Story 5. My neighbor learned my schedule before learning my name. It started small, almost invisible. A presence I could easily convince myself was coincidence. My apartment building was quiet, the kind of place where everyone kept to themselves, and I liked it that way. I could leave my windows open, walk home late at night, and rarely see a soul. But then I started noticing him. The first time it was during a Sunday morning laundry run. I had a basket of clothes balanced on my hip, headphones in mine somewhere else. As I stepped into the laundry room, there he was, standing by the dryer, reading a magazine. He glanced up, smiled casually like we were old friends. But we had never spoken. I shrugged it off. Maybe he lived on my floor, maybe he had the same schedule. But it wasn't just laundry. The next evening, I was returning from the grocery store. My arms heavy with bags, juggling keys and my cat carrier. I noticed him standing by the mailboxes. He waved, cheerful, but that wave, it wasn't accidental. He didn't just see me, he knew I was coming. Days passed and the coincidences stacked up. The timing always precise. Tuesday mornings when I went for coffee before class. Thursday nights when I returned from the library after dark. I would round the corner of the parking lot and there he would be, leaning against his car, seemingly doing nothing, yet always there. Never confronting me. Never saying a word. Just present. The unease started as a whisper in my chest, the kind you ignore until it gnaws at your thoughts. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. People notice each other sometimes. It's natural. But then patterns emerged that couldn't be brushed off. He knew when I left my apartment, even when I tried to slip out unnoticed. He seemed to appear right at the edge of my vision, just enough to remind me he was there. I changed my routes, took different stairs, left my apartment at odd hours. It didn't matter. He adapted. Always there. Sometimes across the street, watching me lock my door. Sometimes on the sidewalk ahead, pretending to check his phone. My heart would hammer when I caught sight of him, and then the slow, creeping realization. He had memorized my life in silent, terrifying detail. I began to notice the little things. The way he would shift his gaze if I looked out my window. How he lingered near the laundry room long after he had no reason to. He knew my schedule before he knew my name. Every time I convinced myself I was imagining it, something happened to prove otherwise. A glance, a shadow, the faintest rustle in the hallway that stopped the moment I froze. By the time a month had passed, The dread had grown into something heavier, something that sat in my chest and refused to leave. My routines, the small moments I had once thought private, were no longer my own. It was subtle, quiet, but the terror was real. I wasn't safe, not really, not even in the small apartment I thought was my sanctuary. And I knew deep down that if I ignored it, it would only get worse. I stopped pretending it was coincidence after he spoke. Not my name. Not hello. Not anything normal. I was coming back from the grocery store later than usual, deliberately later. I had waited an extra hour, sat in my car scrolling on my phone, just to break whatever rhythm he thought he had learned. When I finally walked toward my building, my arms aching from the bags, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. He was sitting on the front steps. He looked up and smiled. "Running late tonight?" The words landed wrong. Too casual. Too accurate. I didn't answer. I nodded once and kept walking, my keys clenched between my fingers. I told myself he could have guessed. Anyone could guess. But my heart wouldn't slow down. After that, he started commenting on things I never mentioned to anyone. "Didn't see you this morning. Thought maybe you were sick. Laundry day changed, huh? Back early today." Each time delivered lightly, friendly, observational, like he was making small talk. But it wasn't small talk. It was inventory. I tested it. I skipped my usual coffee run. Left through the back stairwell instead of the elevator. Took my trash out at midnight. Every change was temporary. Within days he adjusted. He didn't ask questions. He didn't seem surprised. He simply knew. I started feeling watched even when he wasn't there. When I showered, I kept the curtain tight. When I slept, I locked my bedroom door. I stopped playing music because it felt like announcing my presence. I'd pause in the hallway before leaving my apartment, listening, waiting to hear footsteps outside. Sometimes there were none. Sometimes there were, stopping the moment I did. One evening, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. I had taped a small note inside my door just for myself. A reminder about an appointment. I hadn't told anyone about it. I hadn't said it out loud. The next day, as I passed him in the parking lot, he smiled and said, "Hope your appointment goes well tomorrow." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I walked faster, my pulse roaring in my ears. I replayed every possible explanation in my head, every rational excuse, but none of them fit. He wasn't asking questions. He wasn't guessing. He was observing. That night, I realized the worst part. He never crossed the line. No threats. No touching. No following me openly. Nothing I could report. Nothing I could explain without sounding paranoid. And he knew that. He stayed just on the right side of normal while learning everything about me. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle. Every sound felt intentional. Every silence felt watched. I understood then that this wasn't curiosity. It was preparation. And I had no idea what he was preparing for. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse him. I didn't ask questions I didn't want answered. I moved. I broke my lease early. I packed in silence. I stopped using my usual routes and avoided shared spaces as much as I could. I left the building at times that made no sense just to feel like I had control again. The night I carried the last box to my car, I didn't look toward the front steps. I didn't need to. I could feel him watching. The new place was an hour away. Different city. Different routine. Different everything. I told myself it was over. That whatever grip he had on my life was tied to that building, those habits, that version of me. For the first week, I slept better than I had in months. I went out when I wanted. Came home late without checking over my shoulder. I let myself believe that distance had broken the pattern. Then the package arrived. It was waiting outside my door when I got home from work. Small. Neatly taped. No shipping label. No return address. Just my name, written clearly, carefully, like it mattered that it was legible. My hands shook as I picked it up. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the hallway, half expecting footsteps behind me. But it was quiet. Too quiet. Inside the box was nothing valuable. No threat. No note. Just something familiar. A grocery receipt from months ago. One I had thrown away. Folded once. A dryer sheet from the laundry room I used to go to. And a piece of paper with times written on it. Not dates. Just times. 7:40 a.m. 6:12 p.m. 11:03 p.m. My old schedule. Every time I used to leave. Every time I used to come back. I sat on the floor for a long time after that, the box open in front of me, my apartment suddenly feeling very small. He never needed to know my name. He never needed to follow me openly. He had already memorized me. The next morning as I left for work, I noticed something else. Someone had waved at me from across the street. I didn't recognize the face, but the timing was perfect. Story 6. Something was placed outside my door every night. I noticed the coin because it was exactly centered. Not kicked into the corner. Not resting against the wall. It was placed carefully right in front of my door, close enough that I almost stepped on it when I left for work. At first, I assumed it had fallen out of my pocket. A quarter. Ordinary. Forgettable. I picked it up, turned it over once, then dropped it into my bag without thinking much about it. The next morning there was another one. This time it was a penny. Same spot. Same careful placement. Centered. Intentional. I paused longer than I should have, keys in my hand, staring at it like it might explain itself if I waited. My hallway was empty. The building was quiet. No cameras. No doorman. Just doors lined up like sealed mouths. I told myself someone probably dropped it while fumbling with their keys. People are careless like that. I wasn't special. By the third night, I knew that wasn't true. The coin was a nickel. Clean. No scratches. No grime. It looked new, like it had been chosen, not lost. I stood there in my socks, heart thudding, listening for movement on either side of the door. Nothing. I didn't mention it to anyone. Saying it out loud felt ridiculous. What would I even say? Someone keeps leaving money outside my door. It sounded paranoid. Dramatic. Like I wanted attention. So I ignored it. That's the thing about small things. They feel safe to ignore. The coin stopped after a week. I felt relieved, embarrassed even. Like I'd scared myself over nothing. Life went back to normal. Or sleep. The usual rhythms. I stopped checking the floor first thing in the morning. That's when the notes started. The first one wasn't threatening. It wasn't even strange. Just a piece of lined paper folded in half. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were two words. You dropped this. No name. No explanation. Nothing attached to it. I stood there longer this time. Read it again. Checked the floor. Checked my pockets. Nothing was missing. I hadn't dropped anything. The next night there was another note. Same handwriting. You were home late. That one made my stomach tighten. I hadn't told anyone I was running late. I hadn't posted about it. I hadn't even mentioned it on the phone. I bent down slowly, my pulse loud in my ears, and picked up the paper. It was still warm. I don't know why that detail stuck with me, but it did. The paper hadn't cooled yet. Whoever placed it there hadn't been gone long. Story 6. Something was placed outside my door every night. I noticed the coin because it was exactly centered. Not kicked into the corner. Not resting against the wall. It was placed carefully right in front of my door, close enough that I almost stepped on it when I left for work. At first, I assumed it had fallen out of my pocket. A quarter. Ordinary. Forgettable. I picked it up, turned it over once, then dropped it into my bag without thinking much about it. The next morning there was another one. This time it was a penny. Same spot. Same careful placement. Centered. Intentional. I paused longer than I should have, keys in my hand, staring at it like it might explain itself if I waited. My hallway was empty. The building was quiet. No cameras. No doorman. Just doors lined up like sealed mouths. I told myself someone probably dropped it while fumbling with their keys. People are careless like that. I wasn't special. By the third night, I knew that wasn't true. The coin was a nickel. Clean. No scratches. No grime. It looked new, like it had been chosen, not lost. I stood there in my socks, heart thudding, listening for movement on either side of the door. Nothing. I didn't mention it to anyone. Saying it out loud felt ridiculous. What would I even say? Someone keeps leaving money outside my door. It sounded paranoid. Dramatic. Like I wanted attention. So I ignored it. That's the thing about small things. They feel safe to ignore. The coin stopped after a week. I felt relieved, embarrassed even. Like I'd scared myself over nothing. Life went back to normal. Or sleep. The usual rhythms. I stopped checking the floor first thing in the morning. That's when the note started. The first one wasn't threatening. It wasn't even strange. Just a piece of lined paper folded in half. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were 2 words. You dropped this. No name. No explanation. Nothing attached to it. I stood there longer this time. Read it again. Checked the floor. Checked my pockets. Nothing was missing. I hadn't dropped anything. The next night there was another note. Same handwriting. You were home late. That one made my stomach tighten. I hadn't told anyone I was running late. I hadn't posted about it. I hadn't even mentioned it on the phone. I bent down slowly, my pulse loud in my ears, and picked up the paper. It was still warm. I don't know why that detail stuck with me, but it did. The paper hadn't cooled yet. Whoever placed it there hadn't been gone long. I locked my door and pressed my back against it, listening. No footsteps. No voices. Just the building breathing around me. That night I didn't sleep well. Every sound in the hallway felt amplified. Every creak felt deliberate. I kept picturing someone kneeling outside my door, placing the note carefully, listening to me on the other side. The third note was worse. It was shorter. Still awake? I stopped picking them up after that. I would step over them. Leave them there all day. Let them curl at the edges. Let anyone walking by see them, just in case that mattered. Just in case visibility would make it stop. It didn't. By then, I understood something important. This wasn't about communication. It was about escalation. And whoever was doing it was patient. The notes stopped after I ignored them. For 2 nights there was nothing outside my door. No paper. No coins. Just the carpet, flat and undisturbed. I let myself breathe again. I told myself the attention had moved on, that whoever it was had gotten bored. On the 3rd night, something heavier appeared. A key. Not mine. I knew that immediately. Different shape. Different wear. It was placed where the coins had been, angled so it caught the hallway light. Not dropped. Set down. I didn't touch it. I crouched in my doorway, staring at it like it might move on its own. My mind raced through possibilities. Someone lost it. Someone was confused. Someone made a mistake. But no one loses a key directly in front of a single door and walks away. I left it there all day. When I came home that night, it was gone. That scared me more than if it had stayed. The next item appeared 2 nights later. A photograph. It was printed on cheap paper, the kind you get from a drugstore kiosk. Slightly blurry. Taken from across the street. It showed me standing at my kitchen window, my face turned away, the light on behind me. I didn't remember that night. I didn't remember standing there. But the shirt I was wearing in the photo was one I had slept in. I closed the door slowly and locked it twice. I started checking the peephole before leaving. I started jumping at footsteps in the hallway. Every sound felt like a warning. I stopped inviting friends over because I didn't want anyone else pulled into whatever this was. Then the items changed again. Food. At first it was sealed. A granola bar. Unopened. Resting against my door like an offering. I threw it away without touching it. The next night there was a sandwich wrapped in foil. Still warm. I could smell it through the door. That was the night I called my building manager. He sounded annoyed, told me it was probably a prank, said there were no cameras in the hallway and nothing he could do unless I caught someone in the act. I asked if anyone else had complained. He said no. The next item arrived the following morning. A small cardboard box with holes punched into the sides. I noticed the sound before I noticed the box. Scratching. Soft. Uneven. Desperate. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I stood there shaking, listening to whatever was inside move, the noise too alive to ignore. My neighbor's doors stayed closed. No one came out. No one asked questions. When I finally worked up the courage to look inside, the box was empty. No animal. No note. Just a few dark hairs stuck to the cardboard and the faint smell of something that had been afraid. That night, I sat on my couch with every light on, my phone in my hand, knowing the pattern had reached its next stage. This wasn't someone watching anymore. This was someone testing how far they could go. And I was running out of ways to pretend it was nothing. I bought the camera the next morning. It wasn't expensive. Just a small, motion-activated one meant for apartments. I mounted it above my door, angled down the hallway, and tested it 3 times. The app worked. The timestamp was right. I watched myself leave and come back. I watched the door sit untouched for hours. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to safety. That night, I barely slept. I woke up just after 2 a.m. to the sound of nothing. No knock. No scratching. No footsteps. My phone sat on the nightstand silent. No motion alerts. No notifications. In the morning, I opened the app before I even opened the door. There was a gap. The footage jumped from 1:46 a.m. straight to 3:12 a.m. No error message. No corrupted file. Just missing time. My hands were shaking as I opened the door. Something was waiting for me. It wasn't centered this time. It was closer. Almost touching the threshold. A shallow plastic container with holes melted into the lid, uneven and rushed. Inside was a frog. Alive. Its skin was dry and pale, its sides moving too fast as it struggled to breathe. One of its legs bent wrong. It stared up at me without blinking. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding, my mind screaming that this was no longer symbolic. This was no longer a message. This was a rehearsal. I slammed the door shut and backed away until I hit the wall. I called the police. I showed them the camera, the missing footage, the container. They took notes. They nodded. They told me there was no usable evidence, no suspect, no explanation for the gap in the recording. One of them suggested the camera had malfunctioned. Before they left, I checked the app again. The missing time was still gone. That night, I didn't sleep at home. When I came back the next day, the hallway was clean. No container. No marks. No proof anything had ever been there. Except the camera. It was still mounted above my door. Tilted slightly upward. Like someone had adjusted it. And made sure it wouldn't see them again. Story 7. I realized too late why he let me go. It was a Friday night and I had gone out with friends just like any other weekend. I'd had a little too much to drink, laughed a lot, and lost track of time. By the time I stumbled out of the last bar, the streets were empty, and the neon lights were flickering like they were tired of shining. My phone was dying, the battery flashing red, and I realized I had no idea how to get back to my friend's apartment. I wandered aimlessly for what felt like hours. Every street looked the same under the dim street lights, and every corner seemed to swallow sound. The further I walked, the colder it felt, not just physically but in that sinking, hollow way that creeps up when you're alone and exposed. Then a car slowed next to me. I froze, my instincts warning me to step back, but something about the way the driver looked. A man, late 20s, tattoos crawling up his arms, a baseball cap pulled low, made me hesitate. He didn't shout, he didn't rev the engine. He just rolled down the window and asked, "You need a ride?" I hesitated. My brain screamed that I shouldn't, that I should run, that every horror story I'd ever read was happening right here, right now. But I was tired, dizzy, and more than a little drunk. Against every instinct, I nodded and slid into the passenger seat. The air inside smelled faintly of cigarettes and something else I couldn't place. I didn't look at him at first, just stared out the window as the car glided over empty streets. I asked him where he was going and he asked me. I told him my friend's apartment, vague directions because I honestly didn't know. We drove in silence for a moment, just the hum of the engine and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere. Then he started talking casually like we were already acquaintances. He mentioned getting shot a few months ago, how his girlfriend had left him, how he had spent time in prison for robbery. My stomach twisted as I pieced it together. This was someone who could hurt me. I was alone with someone who had no reason to be gentle, and yet, for now, he was calm. I laughed nervously at one of his jokes. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was an edge to him, something I couldn't name. I kept my voice light, friendly, because I felt that every word mattered, that any wrong tone could tip the scales. By the time we pulled up to my friend's building, my pulse was racing. I told him thanks, said I could handle it from here. He nodded, got out to stretch, and stood there like a shadow in the dark parking lot. I opened the door to get out, my hands shaking, my heart hammering, and in that moment, I realized just how close I had been to something I didn't want to imagine. The door shut behind me and I exhaled sharply, trying to convince myself it was over. But the weight in my chest didn't lift. The way he had looked at me, so calm, so deliberate, kept replaying in my mind. Something about that smile, the way it didn't reach his eyes, made my skin crawl. I could feel it even now, the unspoken possibility that I had been walking on the edge of a knife. I stepped into the hallway of my friend's apartment, thinking the bright light and familiar sounds would ground me, but it didn't. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. My friends greeted me cheerfully, oblivious to the storm inside me. I tried to laugh, to act normal, but my hands shook as I took off my coat. He followed me in, or at least I sensed he could have. I couldn't shake the idea that he was still there, just outside, watching. My drunk haze had dulled some instincts, but not all of them. Every shadow now seemed too dark, every sound too precise. The gun he had tucked in his shorts flashed in my memory, a silent threat I could still feel pressing against me. We sat in the living room. He made casual conversation, but my mind kept scanning for signs, any twitch that would tell me his patience was wearing thin, any flicker that meant he could strike at any moment. The casual air was a mask, and I could feel the danger simmering just beneath it. Minutes passed like hours. The room was warm, but my chest was cold, my muscles taut with tension. I realized he had been testing me, a stranger, alone, defenseless. He had decided, somehow, to let me walk away. My stomach churned at the thought. Why me? Why had he let me live while others might not have been so lucky? I wanted to speak, to ask, but my voice caught in my throat. The air was thick with the unspoken. I had survived by a thread, and the thread was his choice, not mine. My mind raced, trying to piece together logic where there was none, trying to find some pattern in his capricious mercy. And when he finally got up to leave, taking the gun with him, the emptiness he left behind was heavier than any threat. I realized then how close I had come to becoming a story of someone else's violence. The casual, almost friendly demeanor had been a mask for lethal potential, and I had only survived because of a decision I couldn't understand, in a world I could barely comprehend. The door shut behind me and I exhaled sharply, trying to convince myself it was over. But the weight in my chest didn't lift. The way he had looked at me, so calm, so deliberate, kept replaying in my mind. Something about that smile, the way it didn't reach his eyes, made my skin crawl. I could feel it even now, the unspoken possibility that I had been walking on the edge of a knife. I stepped into the hallway of my friend's apartment, thinking the bright light and familiar sounds would ground me, but it didn't. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. My friends greeted me cheerfully, oblivious to the storm inside me. I tried to laugh, to act normal, but my hands shook as I took off my coat. He followed me in, or at least I sensed he could have. I couldn't shake the idea that he was still there, just outside, watching. My drunk haze had dulled some instincts, but not all of them. Every shadow now seemed too dark, every sound too precise. The gun he had tucked in his shorts flashed in my memory, a silent threat I could still feel pressing against me. We sat in the living room. He made casual conversation, but my mind kept scanning for signs, any twitch that would tell me his patience was wearing thin, any flicker that meant he could strike at any moment. The casual air was a mask, and I could feel the danger simmering just beneath it. Minutes passed like hours. The room was warm, but my chest was cold, my muscles taut with tension. I realized he had been testing me, a stranger, alone, defenseless. He had decided, somehow, to let me walk away. My stomach churned at the thought. Why me? Why had he let me live while others might not have been so lucky? I wanted to speak, to ask, but my voice caught in my throat. The air was thick with the unspoken. I had survived by a thread, and the thread was his choice, not mine. My mind raced, trying to piece together logic where there was none, trying to find some pattern in his capricious mercy. And when he finally got up to leave, taking the gun with him, the emptiness he left behind was heavier than any threat. I realized then how close I had come to becoming a story of someone else's violence. The casual, almost friendly demeanor had been a mask for lethal potential, and I had only survived because of a decision I couldn't understand, in a world I could barely comprehend. The next few days were a blur. I kept replaying every detail in my mind, the car, the dark streets, his calm voice, the gun tucked in his shorts. I felt like I had been living in a bubble that could have burst at any second, and the reality of it was suffocating. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made my heart jump. Every shadow in my apartment seemed alive, waiting. Then the news came. It was brief, almost buried in the local station's website, but I couldn't look away. A man, similar in description, had attacked someone else in a nearby area. This time there had been no mercy. The details were horrifying. The victim hadn't survived. My stomach turned. Every laugh, every casual word I had exchanged with him now rang like a warning I had ignored. I realized with a cold, sinking horror why he had let me go. I had been a random variable in his night, a pawn in a game I didn't even know existed. The mercy I'd felt was a fluke, a chance I hadn't earned. Someone else had not been so lucky. And that someone else's fate now weighed heavily on me, a reminder that survival can be arbitrary. I walked the streets differently after that. No longer careless, no longer trusting. Every stranger's smile, every kind word, every offered ride carried the shadow of possibility. I knew that night had changed something inside me. A part of me would always remember the calm, deliberate eyes, the casual, almost polite demeanor that had been masking lethal intent. And sometimes, late at night, I imagine him driving through empty streets, looking for someone to test, someone to decide the fate of. The thought doesn't let me rest. The mercy I was given doesn't comfort me. It haunts me, because I survived, yes, but only by chance. And knowing that, I understand something I never want to admit out loud. There is no justice in how danger chooses its victims. Only the haunting, lingering weight of almost becoming one. As you sit here hearing these stories, think about this. How close some of these people came to danger, how ordinary moments can turn into nightmares. Which story unsettled you the most? Which one made you look over your shoulder even for a second? I want to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments which story shook you, or if you've ever experienced something that made your own world feel a little darker. If you want to keep stepping into the shadows with me, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. There are more untold dark stories waiting, and some were never meant to be told. Remember, stay vigilant and stay aware, because the darkness doesn't always wait for nightfall.